Question 1. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing advanced security monitoring for the VCE Vblock system will incur significant upfront costs. However, a comprehensive risk assessment has identified a moderate likelihood of a sophisticated cyber attack targeting virtualized infrastructure. Which approach to managing this identified risk best aligns with professional best practices for VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation? Option A. Rely entirely on the VCE Vblock vendor's default security configurations and assume they are sufficient to protect against sophisticated attacks. Option B. Accept the risk of a cyber attack, as the cost of mitigation is high and the likelihood is only moderate, focusing resources on other areas. Option C. Defer the implementation of advanced security monitoring, focusing only on basic security measures, as the cost outweighs the perceived immediate benefit. Option D. Implement robust security monitoring tools and processes specifically tailored to the VCE Vblock environment, prioritizing the mitigation of the identified cyber attack risk. Correct answer is D. Implement robust security monitoring tools and processes specifically tailored to the VCE Vblock environment, prioritizing the mitigation of the identified cyber attack risk. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the VCE Vblock system, while offering significant benefits, also introduces new and potentially complex risks related to data integrity, system availability, and security within a virtualized environment. The decision-making process must balance the identified benefits against these risks, ensuring that the chosen risk mitigation strategy aligns with the organization's risk appetite and regulatory obligations. The core of the challenge lies in selecting a risk assessment approach that is both comprehensive and practical, providing a clear basis for informed decision-making without becoming overly burdensome or neglecting critical aspects. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the identified risks by evaluating their potential impact and likelihood within the context of the VCE Vblock deployment. This systematic evaluation allows for the prioritization of risks and the development of targeted mitigation strategies, adhering to the principles of risk management as implicitly guided by general IT governance frameworks and best practices relevant to virtualization deployments, and assuming no specific UK/CISI or US regulations are mandated beyond the exam scope. We focus on general principles of sound IT practice, ensures that the organization is not only aware of potential issues, but also has a structured plan to address them. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining operational continuity, protecting sensitive data, and meeting any implicit compliance requirements related to system security and reliability. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cost of implementing security measures without a thorough assessment of the potential impact of a security breach would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of due diligence in understanding the actual threat landscape and the potential financial and reputational damage that could result from a successful attack or system failure. Prioritizes cost savings over risk reduction, which is a direct contravention of prudent risk management principles. Another incorrect approach, which involves ignoring risks that are not immediately apparent or quantifiable, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a failure to conduct a comprehensive risk assessment, potentially overlooking critical vulnerabilities that could have severe consequences. It represents a reactive rather than proactive stance, leaving the organization exposed to unforeseen threats. Such an approach neglects the principle of continuous risk assessment and the need to consider both known and potential future risks. A third incorrect approach, such as relying solely on vendor-provided security features without independent validation, is professionally unsound. While vendors provide security tools, their effectiveness can vary, and they may not fully address the specific operational context or unique threat vectors of the deploying organization. This approach abdicates responsibility for understanding and managing the organization's own risk profile, potentially leading to gaps in security coverage. The professional decision-making process for similar situation should involve a structured risk assessment methodology. This typically includes identifying potential risks, analyzing their likelihood and impact, evaluating existing controls, determining the level of risk, and planning for risk treatment, mitigation, acceptance, transfer, or avoidance. This process should be iterative and involve relevant stakeholders from IT, security, and business units to ensure a holistic understanding of the risks and the effectiveness of proposed solutions. The ultimate goal is to make informed decisions that align with the organization's strategic objectives and risk tolerance. Question 2. Regulatory review indicates that a comprehensive risk assessment is a critical prerequisite for the deployment of VCE Vblock systems. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization framework for conducting this assessment? Option A. Focusing the risk assessment solely on well-documented, historical threats and vulnerabilities, without considering emerging or unknown risks. Option B. Relying exclusively on the security configurations and recommendations provided by the Vblock system vendor, assuming they cover all potential risks. Option C. Conducting a thorough, documented risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes threats and vulnerabilities specific to the Vblock environment and its intended use, with mitigation strategies developed prior to deployment. Option D. Deferring the primary risk assessment activities until after the Vblock system has been fully deployed and is operational. The correct answer is C. Conducting a thorough, documented risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes threats and vulnerabilities specific to the Vblock environment and its intended use, with mitigation strategies developed prior to deployment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. Deploying a Vblock system involves integrating multiple complex technologies, creating a significant risk surface. The professional challenge lies in identifying, assessing, and mitigating these risks within the constraints of the VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization regulatory framework. This requires a thorough understanding of potential vulnerabilities, their impact on business operations, and the specific compliance requirements applicable to the deployment. Failure to conduct a comprehensive risk assessment can lead to security breaches, data loss, service disruptions, and noncompliance, all of which have severe financial and reputational consequences. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented risk assessment process that aligns with the VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization guidelines. This process should identify potential threats and vulnerabilities specific to the virtualized Vblock environment, analyze the likelihood and impact of these risks, and prioritize mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principle of due diligence, mandated by regulatory frameworks that require organizations to proactively manage risks associated with IT infrastructure. By documenting this process, the organization demonstrates compliance and provides an auditable trail of its risk management efforts. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that relies solely on vendor-provided security configurations without independent verification fails to meet the due diligence requirements. While vendors offer security features, they are not a substitute for an organization's own risk assessment, which must consider the specific deployment context and potential misconfigurations. This approach risks overlooking unique vulnerabilities introduced by the specific implementation or integration of the Vblock system. Another incorrect approach is to defer risk assessment to the operational phase after deployment. This is fundamentally flawed as it means potential risks are not identified or mitigated before they can cause harm. Regulatory frameworks emphasize proactive risk management, not reactive damage control. Deploying a system without understanding its inherent risks is a direct violation of this principle. Finally, an approach that focuses only on known, documented threats, ignoring potential zero-day vulnerabilities or novel attack vectors, is insufficient. A robust risk assessment must consider a broader spectrum of potential threats, including those that may not yet be widely known, to ensure comprehensive protection. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, iterative risk assessment methodology. This involves 1. Defining the scope of the Vblock system and its critical assets. 2. Identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities relevant to virtualization and converged infrastructure. 3. Analyzing the likelihood and impact of identified risks. 4. Evaluating existing controls and identifying gaps. 5. Developing and prioritizing mitigation strategies. 6. Documenting the entire process and outcomes. 7. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment as the environment evolves. This systematic approach ensures that all relevant risks are considered and managed in accordance with regulatory expectations and best practices for secure Vblock system deployment. Question 3. The monitoring system demonstrates a critical security vulnerability in a core component of the Vblock system, and the operations team is pushing for an immediate rollback to a previous stable configuration to restore full functionality while a permanent fix is developed. However, the security team advises that the rollback itself may introduce other, potentially more severe, security risks due to outdated configurations. Which of the following approaches best balances immediate operational needs with long-term security and regulatory compliance? Option A. Apply the rollback to a previous stable configuration without further assessment, assuming that a previous configuration is inherently more secure than a known vulnerable state. Option B. Defer any action on the rollback or patching until a comprehensive, in-depth risk assessment of all potential system configurations can be completed, which may take several weeks. Option C. Conduct a rapid, targeted risk assessment of the rollback procedure and its potential security implications, and if deemed acceptable, proceed with the rollback while simultaneously prioritizing the development and testing of a permanent patch. Option D. Immediately initiate the rollback to a previous stable configuration to restore full functionality and address any emergent security concerns as they arise. Correct answer is C. Conduct a rapid, targeted risk assessment of the rollback procedure and its potential security implications, and if deemed acceptable, proceed with the rollback while simultaneously prioritizing the development and testing of a permanent patch. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for system availability with the long-term implications of security vulnerabilities. A Vblock system, by its nature, integrates multiple components, meaning a single vulnerability can have a cascading effect. The pressure to restore service quickly can lead to rushed decisions that bypass proper risk assessment protocols, potentially exposing the organization to significant data breaches or operational disruptions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the remediation process is both effective and compliant with established security policies and regulatory requirements. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured and documented risk assessment before implementing any changes. This aligns with the principles of robust IT governance and security management, which are often mandated by regulatory frameworks governing data protection and system integrity. By conducting a thorough risk assessment, the team can identify potential impacts, likelihood of exploitation, and the effectiveness of proposed mitigation strategies. This ensures that the chosen solution is not only technically sound, but also minimizes residual risk to an acceptable level, thereby safeguarding sensitive data and maintaining operational continuity in a compliant manner. An incorrect approach that involves immediately applying a patch without assessing its full impact is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses the critical step of risk evaluation, potentially introducing new vulnerabilities or causing unforeseen system instability. Such an action would likely violate internal security policies that mandate change control and risk assessment, and could also contravene regulatory requirements that demand due diligence in managing IT security risks. Another incorrect approach, which is to defer the patching indefinitely due to operational concerns, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a failure to proactively manage known security risks. Regulatory frameworks often require organizations to address identified vulnerabilities within a reasonable time frame. Ignoring a known vulnerability, even with the intention of addressing it later, exposes the organization to significant compliance and security risks, and could be interpreted as negligence in the event of a security incident. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a clear, multi-step approach. 1. Identify the vulnerability and its potential impact. 2. Consult relevant documentation and vendor advisories. 3. Initiate a formal risk assessment process, evaluating likelihood, impact, and existing controls. 4. Explore and evaluate potential remediation options, including patches, workarounds, and configuration changes, assessing the risks associated with each. 5. Obtain necessary approvals based on the risk assessment findings and proposed remediation. 6. Implement the approved remediation following established change management procedures. 7. Verify the effectiveness of the remediation and monitor for any adverse effects. This structured approach ensures that decisions are informed, documented, and aligned with both business objectives and regulatory obligations. Question 4. The audit findings indicate that the virtualization layer of the recently deployed VCE Vblock system has not been subjected to a comprehensive validation process against the approved design specifications and vendor best practices, Which of the following actions best addresses this finding and upholds professional deployment standards? Option A. Immediately initiate a rollback of the virtualization layer to its pre-deployment state, assuming the audit findings imply a critical failure that cannot be rectified in the current deployment. Option B. Rely on the system's apparent operational stability and the team's anecdotal confirmation of functionality to close the audit finding, as no immediate performance issues have been reported. Option C. Conduct a detailed review of the virtualization configuration, comparing it against the approved design documents, vendor best practices, and security hardening guides, followed by targeted reconfiguration and revalidation of any discrepancies. Option D. Perform a cursory check of key virtualization components and assume that if no critical errors are flagged by the system's monitoring tools, the validation is sufficient. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed review of the virtualization configuration, comparing it against the approved design documents, vendor best practices, and security hardening guides, followed by targeted reconfiguration and revalidation of any discrepancies. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential deviation from best practices in the deployment of a VCE Vblock system, specifically concerning the validation of the implemented virtualization layer. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the deployment team to balance the urgency of project completion with the imperative of ensuring the system's integrity, security, and compliance with established operational standards. The challenge lies in interpreting audit feedback, which may be general or specific, and translating it into actionable remediation steps that uphold the quality and reliability of the deployed infrastructure. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, documented, and evidence-based validation process. This involves a systematic review of the virtualization configuration against the approved design specifications, vendor best practices, and any relevant internal or external compliance requirements. It ensures that the deployed system functions as intended, is secure against known vulnerabilities, and meets performance expectations. This methodical approach aligns with the principles of responsible IT deployment, minimizing the risk of operational disruptions, security breaches, or non-compliance, which are critical considerations in regulated environments. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on superficial checks or relies on anecdotal evidence of functionality would be professionally unacceptable. This would represent a failure to adhere to due diligence, potentially leading to undetected configuration errors, security misconfigurations, or performance bottlenecks. Such an approach risks the integrity of the Vblock system, exposing the organization to operational instability and potential data compromise. Furthermore, it would likely contravene internal governance policies and potentially external regulatory mandates that require robust system validation and change control. Another incorrect approach that involves immediate rollback without a proper root cause analysis is also professionally unsound. A rollback might seem like a quick fix. It bypasses the critical step of understanding why the audit findings occurred. This failure to diagnose the underlying issue means the same problems could re-emerge in subsequent deployments, indicating a lack of learning and continuous improvement. This approach neglects the professional responsibility to identify and rectify systemic issues within the deployment process. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly understand the audit findings and their implications. Second, consult relevant documentation, including design specifications, vendor guidelines, and compliance frameworks. Third, engage the deployment team and relevant stakeholders to gather information and assess the scope of the issue. Fourth, develop a remediation plan that includes specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, SMART actions. Finally, implement the remediation, revalidate the changes, and document the entire process for future reference and auditability. This systematic process ensures that issues are addressed comprehensively and that lessons learned are incorporated into future operations. Question 5. Implementation of a Vblock system is nearing its scheduled go-live date, and the virtualization security hardening and validation phase has been identified as a potential bottleneck. The project manager is considering proceeding with the deployment and addressing security hardening post-go-live to meet the deadline. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices for VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization? Option A. Deferring comprehensive virtualization security hardening and validation until after the system is operational, with a plan to address it in subsequent phases. Option B. Proceeding with the Vblock system deployment after ensuring all vendor-provided security defaults are enabled and documented. Option C. Expediting the deployment by skipping the detailed security hardening and validation of the virtualization layer, relying on network-level security controls. Option D. Implementing a phased approach where critical security hardening and validation steps are completed and verified before the Vblock system is made accessible to users. The correct answer is A. Deferring comprehensive virtualization security hardening and validation until after the system is operational, with a plan to address it in subsequent phases. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge in balancing the rapid deployment of a Vblock system with the imperative to adhere to established best practices for virtualization security and compliance. The pressure to deliver a functional system quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise long-term stability, security, and regulatory adherence. Careful judgment is required to ensure that immediate deployment needs do not override fundamental principles of secure and compliant system implementation. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive, documented, and validated security configuration before the Vblock system is made operational. This aligns with the principles of security by design and compliance by design, which are foundational to responsible IT deployment. Specifically, it ensures that the virtualization layer, which is critical to the Vblock architecture, is hardened according to industry-accepted security benchmarks and any relevant regulatory requirements applicable to the deployment environment. This proactive stance minimizes the attack surface and reduces the risk of security breaches or compliance violations post-deployment. An incorrect approach that bypasses security hardening and validation before go-live represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It demonstrates a disregard for the organization's security posture and potentially violates data protection regulations by exposing sensitive information to unnecessary risks. This failure to implement security controls at the earliest stage is a breach of professional duty to protect organizational assets and data. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on vendor default configurations without independent verification is also professionally unacceptable. While vendors provide baseline configurations, they are often not optimized for specific security requirements or compliance mandates. Relying on defaults without due diligence can lead to vulnerabilities that are known but unaddressed, creating a false sense of security and exposing the organization to risks. This negligence can have severe legal and financial repercussions. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment that identifies potential security and compliance gaps. This assessment should inform the development of a deployment plan that explicitly incorporates security hardening, testing, and validation phases. Professionals must advocate for adequate time and resources to complete these critical steps, even under pressure for rapid deployment. Decision-making should be guided by a commitment to organizational security, regulatory compliance, and ethical responsibility, prioritizing long-term system integrity over short-term expediency. Question 6. The performance metrics show a consistent degradation in application response times following the recent Vblock system deployment, with specific spikes correlating to increased virtual machine activity. The implementation team is under pressure to resolve this quickly to meet project go-live deadlines. Which of the following actions is the most appropriate next step to address this performance challenge? Option A. Implement a series of broad, system-wide configuration changes across all Vblock components, hoping to inadvertently resolve the performance bottleneck. Option B. Conduct a detailed analysis of the Vblock system storage I/O performance and network latency, correlating these findings with the virtual machine activity logs to identify potential resource contention or configuration issues. Option C. Immediately initiate a rollback of the Vblock system to its pre-deployment state to stabilize the environment and address the performance issues in a less time-sensitive manner. Option D. Advise stakeholders to adjust application configurations to reduce their resource demands, without investigating the underlying Vblock system performance. Correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed analysis of the Vblock system storage, I/O performance and network latency, correlating these findings with the virtual machine activity logs to identify potential resource contention or configuration issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for system stability and performance with the long-term implications of a deployment decision. The Vblock system's performance metrics are indicating a potential bottleneck, which could impact critical business operations. The challenge lies in identifying the root cause and implementing a solution that is not only technically sound, but also adheres to the deployment and implementation guidelines for VCE Vblock systems, as defined by the relevant regulatory framework for the 210-015 exam. This framework likely emphasizes thorough testing, adherence to vendor best practices, and risk mitigation. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it involves a systematic, evidence-based investigation into the performance issue. This aligns with the principles of due diligence and responsible system management. By isolating the Vblock system's components and analyzing their individual contributions to the performance degradation, the team can pinpoint the exact source of the problem. This methodical approach ensures that any remediation efforts are targeted and effective, minimizing the risk of introducing new issues or causing further disruption. Furthermore, adhering to documented troubleshooting procedures and seeking expert consultation when necessary are hallmarks of professional conduct, ensuring compliance with any implicit or explicit guidelines regarding system integrity and operational continuity. An incorrect approach that involves immediately rolling back the entire Vblock system without a clear understanding of the root cause is professionally unacceptable. This action represents a failure in systematic problem solving and could lead to unnecessary downtime and disruption, potentially violating service-level agreements, SLAs, and impacting business continuity. It demonstrates a lack of analytical rigor and a reactive rather than proactive stance. Another incorrect approach, such as making ad hoc configuration changes to individual components without a documented plan or testing, carries a high risk of exacerbating the problem or introducing new instabilities. This violates the principle of controlled change management and could lead to non-compliance with system configuration standards. A third incorrect approach, such as ignoring the performance metrics and continuing with the deployment, is a direct contravention of professional responsibility and any regulatory requirements mandating system stability and performance validation before full operational use. This demonstrates negligence and a disregard for potential business impact. The professional reasoning process for this situation should involve 1. Acknowledging and documenting the performance anomalies. 2. Initiating a structured troubleshooting process, starting with data collection and analysis of the Vblock system's components. 3. Consulting relevant VCE Vblock deployment and implementation documentation and best practices. 4. If necessary, escalating the issue to VCE support or subject matter experts. 5. Developing and testing potential solutions in a controlled environment before implementing them in production. 6. Documenting all actions taken and their outcomes. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, risks are managed, and the deployment adheres to established standards and guidelines. Question 7. Operational review demonstrates that the Vblock system storage subsystem is experiencing intermittent performance degradation following a recent deployment, impacting application responsiveness. The technical team is under pressure to restore optimal performance immediately. Which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and compliant response? Option A. Temporarily disable non-critical applications to reduce storage load, deferring any in-depth investigation or vendor engagement until the next scheduled maintenance window. Option B. Implement a series of unverified configuration changes to the storage array based on forum discussions, hoping to find a quick fix without involving the vendor. Option C. Revert the entire Vblock system to a previous known good state without further investigation, accepting potential data loss as a risk to expedite recovery. Option D. Immediately engage VCE support, providing detailed system logs and performance metrics to collaboratively diagnose and resolve the issue according to vendor-recommended procedures. The correct answer is D. Immediately engage VCE support, providing detailed system logs and performance metrics to collaboratively diagnose and resolve the issue according to vendor-recommended procedures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge where a critical system component, the Vblock storage subsystem, experiences unexpected performance degradation post-deployment. The challenge lies in balancing the urgency of restoring full functionality with the need for a methodical, compliant, and risk-aware approach. Rushing a fix without proper analysis could lead to further system instability, data corruption, or security vulnerabilities, all of which have significant regulatory and business implications. The pressure to meet service-level agreements, SLAs, and avoid business disruption adds to the complexity, demanding a decision that is both technically sound and procedurally correct. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured incident response and problem management process, aligned with VCE's recommended deployment and implementation guidelines and any applicable industry best practices for IT service management. This includes thorough initial diagnostics, engaging the vendor, VCE, for support, and meticulously documenting all steps taken. This methodical approach ensures that the root cause is identified accurately, minimizing the risk of recurrence. It also adheres to the principle of due diligence in system management, which is often implicitly or explicitly required by regulatory frameworks concerning data integrity and service availability. By following vendor-supported procedures and maintaining detailed records, the organization demonstrates a commitment to responsible system operation and provides auditable evidence of its efforts to resolve the issue, which is crucial for compliance and risk management. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing a quick, unverified workaround without vendor consultation or thorough testing is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach bypasses established support channels and potentially introduces undocumented changes, increasing the risk of unforeseen consequences such as data loss or security breaches. Such actions would violate the principle of maintaining system integrity and could be seen as negligence if they lead to further issues. It also fails to meet the standard of care expected in managing critical IT infrastructure. Attempting to reconfigure the storage subsystem without a clear understanding of the root cause, based solely on anecdotal evidence or assumptions, is another professionally unacceptable approach. This demonstrates a lack of systematic problem-solving and a disregard for the potential impact of unauthorized or poorly understood changes. It increases the likelihood of exacerbating the problem, leading to extended downtime and potential data corruption, which would have serious compliance implications regarding data protection and business continuity. Ignoring the issue and hoping it resolves itself is a clear abdication of responsibility. This passive approach directly contravenes the duty of care to maintain system performance and availability. It exposes the organization to significant risks, including SLA breaches, reputational damage, and potential regulatory penalties for failing to ensure the security and reliability of its IT systems. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a challenge should first activate their organization's incident management process. This typically involves 1. Incident identification and logging. Clearly define the problem, its impact, and urgency. 2. Initial diagnosis. Gather relevant logs, performance metrics, and system configurations. 3. Escalation and vendor engagement. Contact the vendor VCE for expert support and guidance, especially for complex hardware/software integrations. 4. Root cause analysis. Work collaboratively with the vendor to identify the underlying issue. 5. Solution development and testing. Propose and test potential solutions in a controlled environment. 6. Implementation and verification. Apply the fix and thoroughly verify system performance. 7. Documentation and review. Record all actions, outcomes, and lessons learned. This structured approach ensures that decisions are data-driven, risks are managed, and compliance requirements are met through diligent and documented actions. Question 8. Strategic planning requires a proactive approach to system maintenance. During a VCE Vblock system deployment, the client requests to defer a critical security patch that is scheduled for immediate implementation, citing concerns about potential downtime and immediate cost implications. As the deployment engineer, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Refuse the client's request without further explanation, citing policy adherence as the sole reason. Option B. Proceed with the deployment without the patch and assume that the risk of a security incident is negligible in the short term. Option C. Explain the risks associated with deferring the patch, including potential security vulnerabilities and compliance issues, and propose a plan to expedite the patching process within established guidelines or seek formal, documented approval for any deviation. Option D. Immediately agree to the client's request to bypass the patch to avoid disrupting the deployment schedule, and maintain client satisfaction? The correct answer is C. Explain the risks associated with deferring the patch, including potential security vulnerabilities and compliance issues, and propose a plan to expedite the patching process within established guidelines or seek formal, documented approval for any deviation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge stemming from a conflict between a client's immediate desire for a cost-saving measure and the long-term implications for system integrity and compliance. The VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization context implies a regulated environment where data security, availability, and auditability are paramount. The client's request to bypass a standard security patching procedure, even for a seemingly minor update, introduces a risk of non-compliance with established security policies and potentially regulatory requirements. The pressure to satisfy the client's perceived urgency, coupled with the potential for immediate cost savings, creates a tension that requires careful ethical and professional judgment. The core challenge lies in balancing client satisfaction with the responsibility to uphold professional standards and ensure the secure and compliant operation of the deployed Vblock system. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves prioritizing the established security and compliance protocols over the client's immediate request. This means explaining to the client the rationale behind the mandatory patching schedule, highlighting the potential risks of deferring updates, e.g., security vulnerabilities, compliance breaches, future compatibility issues, and offering to expedite the patching process if feasible within the established procedures, or to document the risks and obtain formal written authorization for any deviation, which would then be reviewed against policy. This approach upholds professional integrity by adhering to best practices for system security and maintenance, which are often implicitly or explicitly tied to regulatory frameworks governing data handling and system operations. It demonstrates a commitment to the long-term stability and security of the client's infrastructure, aligning with the principles of responsible IT deployment and management. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately agree to the client's request to bypass the patching procedure without proper assessment or documentation. This fails to uphold professional responsibility by potentially introducing security risks and violating established deployment and maintenance guidelines. It could lead to a breach of compliance if the bypass patch addresses a known vulnerability that is subject to regulatory oversight. Another incorrect approach is to refuse the request outright without providing a clear explanation or offering alternative solutions. While maintaining compliance is important, a lack of communication and collaboration can damage client relationships and may not fully address the client's underlying concerns about cost or downtime. This approach can be perceived as unhelpful and inflexible. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with the bypass and hope that no negative consequences arise. This is a negligent and unethical practice, as it knowingly disregards established procedures and potential risks, placing the client's data and system integrity in jeopardy. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to act in the client's best interest. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes risk assessment, adherence to established policies and regulations, and transparent communication. When faced with a client request that deviates from standard procedures, the first step is to understand the client's motivation and the perceived urgency. Subsequently, the professional must evaluate the request against the relevant regulatory framework, internal policies, and best practices for VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation. This includes assessing the potential security, operational, and compliance implications of fulfilling or denying the request. If the request poses a risk, the professional should clearly articulate these risks to the client, referencing specific policy or regulatory requirements where applicable. If a deviation is absolutely necessary and justifiable, it should be formally documented, with all associated risks acknowledged and accepted by the client in writing, and then reviewed for compliance with overarching governance. The ultimate goal is to provide a solution that is both technically sound and ethically responsible, ensuring the long-term security and compliance of the deployed system. Question 9. Investigation of process optimization for VCE Vblock system deployments. A team proposes to streamline the pre-deployment configuration validation phase by automating the generation of configuration files based on a simplified template, bypassing the detailed manual cross-referencing with the original design specifications. This approach aims to significantly reduce the time spent on this specific task. Option A. Focus optimization efforts on post-deployment performance tuning, as this is where the most significant user-impacting improvements can be realized, and pre-deployment validation is a necessary but less critical phase. Option B. Implement the automated generation of configuration files, as the time savings are substantial and the simplified template is derived from common deployment scenarios. Option C. Proceed with the automation immediately, as the primary goal of process optimization is to increase deployment speed, and the manual cross-referencing is considered a redundant step in most cases. Option D. Conduct a pilot program to test the automated configuration file generation against a subset of deployments, measuring its impact on validation accuracy and compliance with VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization guidelines before full adoption. The correct answer is B. Implement the automated generation of configuration files, as the time savings are substantial and the simplified template is derived from common deployment scenarios. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent complexity of Vblock system deployments and the critical need for process optimization to ensure efficient and compliant operations. The challenge lies in balancing the drive for speed and cost-effectiveness with the absolute necessity of adhering to the regulatory framework governing VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization. Misinterpreting or neglecting specific procedural requirements can lead to significant compliance breaches, operational inefficiencies, and potential security vulnerabilities. Careful judgment is required to identify and implement optimization strategies that enhance performance without compromising the integrity of the deployment process or violating established guidelines. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, data-driven analysis of existing processes before implementing changes. This aligns with the principles of continuous improvement and risk management, which are implicitly or explicitly mandated by regulatory frameworks focused on system deployment. By identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies through objective measurement and evaluation, professionals can implement targeted optimizations that are demonstrably beneficial and compliant. This methodical approach ensures that any changes made are well justified, traceable, and less likely to introduce unintended negative consequences or compliance issues. Adhering to the established VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization guidelines means that any optimization must be evaluated against these specific requirements, ensuring that the optimized process still meets all mandated standards for security, performance, and data integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on reducing deployment time without a comprehensive understanding of the underlying processes fails to acknowledge the potential for introducing errors or bypassing critical validation steps. This can lead to regulatory failures by not adhering to the mandated sequence of operations or quality checks outlined in the VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization framework. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the personal experience of a few individuals, rather than objective data, risks implementing changes that are not universally applicable or effective, potentially leading to inconsistent deployments and compliance gaps. This bypasses the structured, evidence-based decision-making expected within a regulated environment. A third incorrect approach that overlooks the integration points with other IT systems or business processes during optimization can create downstream issues and compliance problems, as the VCE Vblock system does not operate in isolation. This demonstrates a failure to consider the holistic impact of process changes, which is often a requirement for robust system deployments. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly understand the current deployment process and its associated documentation, including all relevant VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization guidelines. Second, identify key performance indicators, KPI, that reflect both efficiency and compliance. Third, collect objective data on these KPIs to establish a baseline. Fourth, brainstorm potential optimization strategies, evaluating each against the regulatory framework and potential risks. Fifth, pilot the most promising strategies in a controlled environment, measuring their impact on the established KPIs. Finally, Implement the validated optimizations with clear documentation and ongoing monitoring to ensure sustained compliance and performance. Question 10. What factors determine the most effective and compliant approach to optimizing the deployment and implementation processes for a VCE Vblock system, considering the need to balance efficiency gains with robust security and operational integrity? Option A. Prioritizing the fastest possible deployment timeline to realize cost savings, even if it means deferring some security configurations and compliance checks. Option B. Comprehensive risk assessment that evaluates potential impacts on security, compliance, and operational continuity, coupled with thorough validation and stakeholder alignment. Option C. Implementing optimizations based on anecdotal evidence from other projects without formal validation or consideration of the specific VCE Vblock system's unique architecture and regulatory context. Option D. Focusing solely on reducing the number of steps in the deployment checklist to streamline the process, without assessing the functional necessity or security implications of each step. The correct answer is B. A comprehensive risk assessment that evaluates potential impacts on security, compliance, and operational continuity, coupled with thorough validation and stakeholder alignment. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT infrastructure projects, balancing the drive for efficiency and cost reduction with the imperative to maintain robust security and compliance. The Vblock system, by its integrated nature, offers significant potential for process optimization in deployment and implementation. However, the complexity of such a system, coupled with the need to adhere to specific regulatory frameworks relevant to the VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization exam, implying a focus on enterprise IT environments, potentially with data privacy or financial service implications, depending on the specific jurisdiction this exam targets. For this question, we will assume a general enterprise context where data integrity and operational continuity are paramount, means that shortcuts or poorly considered optimizations can have severe consequences. The correct approach focuses on a holistic and risk-aware methodology for process optimization. It acknowledges that while efficiency is a goal, it cannot come at the expense of security, compliance, or operational stability. This involves thorough analysis of the existing processes, identification of bottlenecks, and the development of optimized solutions that are validated against security policies, regulatory requirements, and business continuity plans. This aligns with best professional practice by ensuring that any changes are implemented in a controlled and predictable manner, minimizing the risk of introducing vulnerabilities or operational disruptions. The emphasis on documentation, testing, and stakeholder alignment ensures transparency and accountability, which are critical for maintaining trust and meeting audit requirements. Incorrect approaches fail to adequately consider the interconnectedness of system components and the potential downstream impacts of seemingly minor changes. For instance, prioritizing speed of deployment over thorough security configuration checks directly violates the principle of least privilege and could expose sensitive data. Similarly, bypassing established change management protocols, even for perceived minor optimizations, undermines the integrity of the system and increases the likelihood of unintended consequences, which could lead to regulatory noncompliance if data integrity or availability is compromised. Ignoring the need for comprehensive testing before and after optimization can lead to operational failures that have significant financial and reputational repercussions, and potentially breach service-level agreements or regulatory mandates concerning system uptime and data accessibility. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This begins with clearly defining the objectives of the optimization, followed by a comprehensive analysis of potential risks and their impact. Stakeholder engagement is crucial throughout the process to ensure buy-in and to gather diverse perspectives. Any proposed optimization should be evaluated against established security baselines, compliance requirements, and operational best practices. A phased implementation with rigorous testing and rollback plans is essential. Finally, continuous monitoring and review are necessary to ensure that the optimization remains effective and does not introduce new risks over time. Question 11. When evaluating process optimization for a VCE Vblock system deployment, which of the following strategies best balances rapid implementation with long-term system stability and adherence to operational best practices? Option A. prioritizing the immediate application of all identified performance tuning parameters to achieve the fastest possible system startup, deferring comprehensive validation until after the system is fully operational. Option B, applying optimization techniques to individual Vblock components in isolation, without a comprehensive review of their potential impact on the integrated system as a whole. Option C, implementing a series of incremental, well-defined optimization steps, each followed by rigorous testing and validation of performance and stability before proceeding to the next phase. Option D, relying exclusively on the default optimization settings provided by the Vblock vendor, assuming they are universally applicable and sufficient for all deployment scenarios. Correct answer is C, implementing a series of incremental, well-defined optimization steps, each followed by rigorous testing and validation of performance and stability before proceeding to the next phase. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because the VCE Vblock system is a complex, integrated infrastructure solution. Optimizing its deployment and implementation requires a holistic understanding of how various components interact and how changes in one area can impact others. The pressure to deliver quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise long-term performance, stability, and adherence to best practices, potentially violating the spirit, if not the letter, of regulatory frameworks governing IT infrastructure deployment and data integrity. The correct approach, focusing on a phased, iterative optimization process with thorough testing and validation at each stage, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles of responsible IT deployment, emphasizing risk mitigation and ensuring that the deployed system meets performance, security, and operational requirements. Such a methodical approach minimizes the likelihood of introducing errors or vulnerabilities that could lead to data loss, service disruption, or non-compliance with any applicable data protection or operational standards. It also allows for continuous learning and adaptation, crucial for complex systems. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over comprehensive validation risks introducing subtle but significant performance bottlenecks or security vulnerabilities. This could lead to system instability, data corruption, or unauthorized access, which would be a direct contravention of professional duty and potentially violate regulatory requirements related to data security and system availability. Another incorrect approach, such as implementing optimizations without considering the interdependencies within the Vblock system, could lead to unforeseen negative consequences in other integrated components, such as storage or networking, resulting in system-wide degradation and potential compliance breaches. A third incorrect approach, relying solely on vendor default configurations without tailored optimization, fails to leverage the system's full potential and may not meet specific business or regulatory performance benchmarks, thereby not fulfilling the professional obligation to deliver an optimized solution. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the project's objectives, including performance targets, security mandates, and any relevant compliance obligations. This should be followed by a risk assessment to identify potential pitfalls of different optimization strategies. The chosen approach should then be broken down into manageable phases, with defined testing and validation criteria for each phase. Continuous monitoring and feedback loops are essential to adapt the strategy as needed, ensuring that the final deployment is robust, efficient, and compliant. Question 12. The evaluation methodology shows that during the Vblock system deployment, a significant divergence in perceived priorities exists between the IT operations team, focused on infrastructure stability and performance tuning, and the business unit leaders, who are primarily concerned with the system's ability to support new revenue-generating applications. Which approach best ensures alignment and successful adoption of the Vblock system? Option A. Focus exclusively on cost reduction targets set by executive management, ensuring the Vblock system is deployed within budget, even if it means scaling back certain functionalities. Option B. Proceed with the deployment based on assumptions about business unit needs, relying on informal discussions and perceived requirements without formal validation. Option C. Proactively engage all key stakeholders to define and agree upon clear, measurable success criteria for the Vblock system deployment that encompass both technical performance and business value. Option D. Prioritize the technical specifications and performance metrics defined solely by the IT operations team, assuming business needs will adapt to the deployed infrastructure. The correct answer is C. Proactively engage all key stakeholders to define and agree upon clear, measurable success criteria for the Vblock system deployment that encompass both technical performance and business value. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows a critical juncture in the Vblock system deployment where stakeholder alignment is paramount for successful implementation and adoption. The challenge lies in balancing the diverse and often conflicting priorities of different stakeholder groups, including IT operations, business units, and executive management. Each group has unique perspectives on performance, cost, security, and usability, which can lead to disagreements during the deployment phase. Failure to address these differing needs can result in project delays, scope creep, user dissatisfaction, and ultimately, a Vblock system that does not meet its intended business objectives. The correct approach, which involves proactively engaging all key stakeholders to define and agree upon clear, measurable success criteria for the Vblock system deployment, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles of effective project management and IT governance, emphasizing communication, collaboration, and shared understanding. By establishing these criteria early, the project team can ensure that the deployment is aligned with business goals and that all parties have a common understanding of what constitutes a successful outcome. This proactive engagement mitigates risks associated with misaligned expectations and fosters a sense of ownership and buy-in across all stakeholder groups. This approach is implicitly supported by general IT best practices and governance frameworks that advocate for stakeholder involvement and clear objective setting, even if specific regulatory citations are not directly applicable to this conceptual aspect of deployment. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize the technical specifications and performance metrics defined solely by the IT operations team without adequate consultation with business units. This fails to acknowledge the business's ultimate need for the system and can lead to a technically sound but functionally inadequate solution. This approach risks violating the implicit ethical obligation to deliver value to the organization and could be seen as a failure in professional duty to ensure the technology serves the business. Another incorrect approach would be to focus exclusively on cost reduction targets set by executive management, potentially compromising essential performance, security, or usability features required by end users and IT operations. This demonstrates a lack of holistic understanding of the project's objectives and can lead to a system that is cheap but ineffective, ultimately failing to deliver the expected return on investment. This represents a failure in professional judgment by not considering the full spectrum of project requirements and impacts. A third incorrect approach would be to proceed with the deployment based on assumptions about stakeholder needs without formal validation or agreement. This relies on guesswork rather than data-driven decision-making and significantly increases the risk of misalignment and dissatisfaction. This is a failure in due diligence and professional responsibility to ensure that the deployment is based on a solid understanding of requirements. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured stakeholder analysis to identify all relevant parties, their interests, and their influence. This should be followed by a comprehensive requirements gathering process that actively seeks input from all identified stakeholders. Establishing a clear communication plan and a formal process for agreeing upon project objectives and success criteria is crucial. Regular feedback loops and change management processes should be in place to address evolving needs and ensure continued alignment throughout the deployment lifecycle. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates that a business unit is pushing for an accelerated deployment of a new VCE Vblock system to meet aggressive market demands, expressing concerns that extensive security and compliance validation will significantly delay the go-live date. As the deployment lead, what is the most professionally responsible approach to manage the stakeholder pressure while ensuring the Vblock system adheres to all relevant regulatory frameworks and internal security policies? Option A. Proceed with the deployment as requested by the business unit, prioritizing speed, and schedule a comprehensive security and compliance audit for the Vblock system to be conducted immediately after the system is live. Option B. Halt the deployment until a complete and exhaustive security and compliance validation is performed, regardless of the business unit's timeline, to ensure absolute adherence to all regulatory requirements before any system goes live. Option C. Escalate the business unit's concerns to senior management, highlighting the potential business impact of delays, and propose a streamlined, risk-based security and compliance review process that can be completed within the business unit's desired timeline. Option D. Initiate a phased deployment strategy where core functionalities are deployed rapidly, with security and compliance validations for advanced features and integrations conducted post-launch, contingent on business unit sign-off for risk acceptance. The correct answer is D. Initiate a phased deployment strategy where core functionalities are deployed rapidly, with security and compliance validations for advanced features and integrations conducted post-launch, contingent on business unit sign-off for risk acceptance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge stemming from the inherent tension between rapid deployment objectives and the need for robust security and compliance within a Vblock system. Stakeholders, particularly those focused on business agility and time to market, may prioritize speed over thorough validation, creating a conflict with IT governance and security teams who are responsible for ensuring adherence to regulatory frameworks and internal policies. The VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization exam context implies a need to navigate these competing interests while upholding the integrity and security of the deployed infrastructure. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, risk-based engagement with all relevant stakeholders, ensuring that security and compliance requirements are integrated into the deployment lifecycle from the outset. This aligns with best practices in IT governance and cybersecurity, which emphasize a proactive rather than reactive stance. Specifically, engaging with the security and compliance teams early allows for the identification and mitigation of potential risks before they become costly issues. This approach ensures that the Vblock system deployment not only meets business objectives, but also adheres to the regulatory framework governing the organization's operations, thereby preventing potential breaches, fines, and reputational damage. This proactive integration is a cornerstone of responsible IT deployment. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with deployment based solely on the business unit's urgency without adequate security and compliance review. This directly violates the principle of due diligence and regulatory adherence. Organizations are typically bound by specific laws and industry standards, e.g., data protection regulations, financial compliance mandates, that dictate security controls and audit trails. Bypassing these reviews can lead to non-compliance, resulting in significant financial penalties, legal liabilities, and loss of customer trust. Another incorrect approach is to defer all security and compliance concerns to a post-deployment audit. This reactive strategy is inherently flawed. Security vulnerabilities and compliance gaps discovered after deployment are far more difficult and expensive to remediate. Furthermore, operating a system that is known to be non-compliant or insecure exposes the organization to immediate risks of data breaches and operational disruptions, which can have severe consequences. This approach demonstrates a failure to implement a robust security posture and a disregard for regulatory obligations. A third incorrect approach is to implement security controls in isolation without understanding their impact on the Vblock system's virtualization layer or the overall business process. This can lead to misconfigurations, performance degradation, or unintended security gaps. Effective security and compliance require a holistic understanding of the system architecture and its operational context, ensuring that controls are both effective and practical within the VCE Vblock environment. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with this situation should adopt a collaborative and risk-aware decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the business imperative for rapid deployment. 2. Clearly articulating the security and compliance requirements and their regulatory underpinnings. 3. Facilitating open communication between business, IT, and security/compliance teams to identify potential conflicts and find mutually agreeable solutions. 4. Employing a risk assessment framework to prioritize security and compliance activities based on their potential impact. 5. Documenting all decisions, risk acceptances, and mitigation strategies. 6. Ensuring that the deployment plan incorporates necessary security and compliance checkpoints throughout the lifecycle, not just at the beginning or end. This structured approach ensures that all critical aspects of the deployment are addressed, balancing business needs with the imperative to maintain a secure and compliant Vblock system. Question 14. System analysis indicates that during the VCE Vblock system deployment, the project manager has identified several key stakeholder groups, including the IT infrastructure team, the application development teams, and the business unit managers who will be the primary end users. The project manager needs to ensure that the Vblock system implementation effectively meets the diverse needs of these groups while adhering to the specific guidelines for 210-015 VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization, which approach best ensures a successful and compliant deployment. Option A. Conduct a series of workshops and interviews with representatives from all identified stakeholder groups to elicit, document, and validate their specific requirements and expectations for the Vblock system. Option B. Prioritize the technical specifications provided by the IT infrastructure team, as they are responsible for the underlying Vblock architecture and operational stability. Option C. Assume that the application development team's requirements are paramount, as the Vblock system's primary purpose is to support their applications. Option D. Focus on the immediate operational needs of the business unit managers, as their satisfaction is the ultimate measure of the system's success. Correct answer is B. Prioritize the technical specifications provided by the IT infrastructure team, as they are responsible for the underlying Vblock architecture and operational stability. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the Vblock system deployment involves multiple stakeholders with potentially conflicting priorities and varying levels of technical understanding. The project manager must navigate these diverse perspectives to ensure successful implementation while adhering to the specific regulatory framework for the 210-015 VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization exam. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the technical requirements of the Vblock system with the business objectives and operational needs of different departments, all within the defined regulatory scope. The correct approach, which involves proactively engaging all key stakeholders to gather comprehensive requirements and establish clear communication channels, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles of good project management, and more importantly, with the implicit regulatory expectation of thorough due diligence and stakeholder alignment within the VCE Vblock framework. By ensuring all parties are heard and their needs are documented and addressed, the project manager minimizes the risk of scope creep, misunderstandings, and ultimately, project failure. This proactive engagement fosters transparency and accountability, crucial elements for successful IT deployments under any regulatory regime. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the technical team's perspective, neglecting input from business units or end users, would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate the spirit of comprehensive system deployment by not accounting for the practical application and business value of the Vblock system. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of consideration for the impact on other departments and could lead to a system that is technically sound but operationally ineffective, failing to meet the organization's overall goals. Another incorrect approach, which involves making assumptions about stakeholder needs without direct consultation, is also professionally unsound. This bypasses the critical step of requirements gathering and validation, leading to potential misinterpretations and rework. From a regulatory standpoint, such an approach could be seen as a failure to conduct proper due diligence, potentially leading to noncompliance if the deployed system does not meet implicit or explicit operational or security requirements mandated by the VCE Vblock framework. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of deployment over thorough stakeholder engagement, assuming that requirements can be refined later, is risky and unprofessional. While efficiency is important, rushing through critical phases like requirements gathering can lead to fundamental design flaws that are costly and time-consuming to rectify. This haste could also lead to overlooking critical regulatory considerations that are best identified and addressed early in the deployment lifecycle. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach to stakeholder identification and analysis. This includes understanding their roles, interests, and influence on the project. A robust requirements gathering methodology, incorporating workshops, interviews, and documentation review, is essential. Regular communication and feedback loops with all stakeholders are paramount to ensure alignment and manage expectations throughout the VCE Vblock system deployment. Question 15. The performance metrics show that the Vblock system is operating within acceptable parameters post-deployment, but the deployment team is concerned about a potential delay in meeting a critical business go-live date due to the time required for comprehensive post-deployment validation, as outlined in the VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization guidelines. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the deployment team? Option A. Escalate the timeline concern to project management and relevant stakeholders, clearly articulating the risks associated with skipping validation steps versus the business impact of a delay, and propose a revised, compliant validation schedule. Option B. Implement a simplified, abbreviated validation checklist that covers only the most critical components, deeming it sufficient for the immediate go-live requirement. Option C. Proceed with the go-live date, documenting the skipped validation steps and planning to complete them immediately after the business launch, assuming the current performance is indicative of a stable deployment. Option D. Expedite the remaining validation steps by performing them concurrently with the business go-live, accepting a higher risk of encountering issues during the critical business period. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the go-live date, documenting the skipped validation steps and planning to complete them immediately after the business launch, assuming the current performance is indicative of a stable deployment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the deployment team is facing a conflict between adhering to the VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization guidelines, and a perceived need to expedite the project to meet a critical business deadline. The challenge lies in balancing project timelines with the integrity of the deployment process, which is governed by specific regulatory and best practice frameworks. Careful judgment is required to ensure that shortcuts do not compromise system stability, security, or compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the established VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization guidelines. This aligns with the principle of doing it right the first time and ensures that the deployment is robust, secure, and maintainable. Following the documented procedures, even if it means a slight delay, mitigates the risk of future issues, reduces the likelihood of costly rework, and upholds the professional integrity of the deployment team. It demonstrates a commitment to quality and compliance, which are paramount in IT infrastructure deployments. An incorrect approach that bypasses critical validation steps would represent a failure to comply with the VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization guidelines. This could lead to an unstable or insecure Vblock environment, potentially violating internal IT policies and industry best practices for system deployment. Such a failure could result in significant business disruption, data breaches, or non-compliance with any relevant data protection regulations, leading to reputational damage and financial penalties. Another incorrect approach that involves making undocumented configuration changes to accelerate deployment would be a direct violation of change management procedures and the VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization framework. This introduces significant risk as these changes are not tested, documented, or approved, making troubleshooting and future maintenance extremely difficult. It undermines the auditability of the deployment and could lead to unforeseen system conflicts or performance degradation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly identify the conflict between the deadline and the established procedures. Second, consult the VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization documentation to understand the rationale behind the required steps and the potential risks of deviation. Third, communicate the findings and risks to project stakeholders, including management, clearly outlining the implications of both adhering to and deviating from the guidelines. Fourth, explore alternative solutions that might expedite the process without compromising the integrity of the deployment, such as reallocating resources or adjusting the project scope if feasible. The final decision should be based on a thorough risk assessment and a clear understanding of the potential consequences, always prioritizing compliance and system stability. Question 16. The audit findings indicate a critical security vulnerability has been identified within the VCE Vblock system's virtualization layer, posing a significant risk of unauthorized access and data compromise. The immediate business impact is a potential disruption to core services if the vulnerability is exploited. The IT operations team is proposing an expedited patching process, bypassing standard change control procedures to restore service as quickly as possible. Which of the following represents the most professionally responsible and compliant approach to addressing this critical security vulnerability? Option A. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis, develop a validated remediation plan, implement the fix following a controlled change management process with comprehensive testing, and document all actions. Option B. Implement a temporary workaround to mitigate the immediate risk, deferring the permanent fix and full investigation until after the peak business period has passed. Option C. Immediately apply the vendor-provided patch without further internal testing or validation, prioritizing the speed of service restoration above all else. Option D. Escalate the issue to senior management with a request for immediate approval to bypass all standard security and change control procedures due to the critical nature of the vulnerability. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis, develop a validated remediation plan, implement the fix following a controlled change management process with comprehensive testing, and document all actions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to conflicting priorities between immediate operational needs and long-term compliance requirements. The pressure to restore service quickly, coupled with the potential for reputational damage from a prolonged outage, creates a high-stakes environment. The decision-maker must balance the urgency of the situation with the imperative to adhere to established security protocols and regulatory mandates, which are designed to prevent future, potentially more severe, incidents. Failure to do so could result in significant financial penalties, legal repercussions, and a loss of customer trust. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough, documented investigation and remediation process that aligns with the VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization framework and any applicable regulatory guidelines. This involves a systematic analysis of the root cause, implementation of a validated fix, and comprehensive testing to ensure the vulnerability is fully addressed without introducing new issues. This methodical approach ensures that the system is not only restored, but also secured against future exploitation, thereby upholding the integrity of the Vblock environment and demonstrating due diligence in compliance. This aligns with best practices in IT governance and risk management, emphasizing a proactive and controlled response to security incidents. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing a quick fix without a full root cause analysis and validation is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses critical security and operational controls. This approach risks leaving residual vulnerabilities unaddressed, potentially leading to repeat incidents or more sophisticated attacks. It also violates the principles of controlled change management and may contravene regulatory requirements for incident response and system integrity. Deploying a patch based solely on vendor recommendations without internal verification and testing is also professionally unsound. While vendor guidance is valuable, it does not absolve the organization of its responsibility to ensure that changes are compatible with its specific environment and do not introduce unintended consequences. This can lead to system instability or security gaps and demonstrates a failure to exercise independent professional judgment and due diligence. Escalating the issue to senior management without providing a clear, actionable plan for remediation is an abdication of responsibility. While escalation is sometimes necessary, it should be accompanied by a proposed solution or a request for specific resources or decisions, not simply a statement of the problem. This approach fails to demonstrate proactive problem solving and can lead to delayed or ineffective responses, increasing the risk of further compromise. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this domain should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the problem and its potential impact. This involves gathering all relevant information, assessing risks against established policies and regulations, and identifying potential solutions. The framework should then guide the evaluation of these solutions based on their effectiveness, efficiency, compliance, and long-term implications. A critical step is to document the decision-making process, including the rationale for the chosen course of action and any alternatives considered. This documentation serves as evidence of due diligence and professional accountability, especially during audits or post-incident reviews. In situations involving security vulnerabilities, the framework must explicitly incorporate incident response plans and change management procedures to ensure a controlled and compliant resolution. Question 17. Process analysis reveals that a new Vblock system deployment is being considered to enhance data center capabilities. To ensure a smooth transition and minimize disruption, what is the most critical component of the pre-deployment phase that directly addresses potential negative consequences? Option A. Conducting a comprehensive impact assessment that evaluates the Vblock system's effects on existing infrastructure, applications, security, and business operations, and developing mitigation strategies based on these findings. Option B. Delegating the entire assessment process to the IT infrastructure team without consulting application owners or the security department. Option C. Relying on the vendor's standard deployment checklist, assuming it covers all potential integration challenges with the current environment. Option D. Prioritizing the technical configuration of the Vblock system based on its advertised performance metrics, with minimal consideration for its interaction with existing systems. The correct answer is A. Conducting a comprehensive impact assessment that evaluates the Vblock system's effects on existing infrastructure, applications, security, and business operations, and developing mitigation strategies based on these findings. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent complexity of Vblock system deployments and the critical need to adhere to established impact assessment methodologies. The challenge lies in accurately predicting and quantifying the potential effects of a new Vblock deployment on existing IT infrastructure, business operations, and security posture. Failure to conduct a thorough impact assessment can lead to unforeseen disruptions, increased costs, security vulnerabilities, and non-compliance with regulatory requirements. The pressure to deploy quickly can sometimes lead to shortcuts, making rigorous adherence to process analysis crucial. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive impact assessment that considers all relevant aspects of the Vblock system's integration. This includes evaluating its effect on network bandwidth, storage capacity, compute resources, application performance, data integrity, and security controls. It requires engaging with stakeholders across IT operations, application owners, and security teams to gather requirements and identify potential conflicts or dependencies. This approach aligns with best practices in IT service management and risk management, ensuring that potential negative impacts are identified, mitigated, and documented. From a regulatory perspective, a thorough impact assessment is often a prerequisite for demonstrating due diligence and compliance with data protection and operational resilience frameworks. It provides the necessary evidence to justify deployment decisions and to build a robust business continuity and disaster recovery plan. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that focuses solely on the technical specifications of the Vblock system without considering its integration into the broader IT ecosystem is professionally unacceptable. This failure to assess interdependencies can lead to performance bottlenecks, resource contention, and unexpected system failures, directly contravening the principles of operational stability and service delivery. Ethically, it represents a lack of diligence and a disregard for the potential disruption to business operations. Another incorrect approach is to rely on anecdotal evidence or past experiences with similar, but not identical, systems. While experience is valuable, each Vblock deployment is unique due to specific configurations, existing infrastructure, and business requirements. This approach risks overlooking critical, system-specific impacts and can lead to inaccurate predictions and inadequate mitigation strategies. It fails to meet the professional standard of evidence-based decision-making and can result in regulatory noncompliance if the assessment does not adequately address the specific risks of the new deployment. A third incorrect approach is to delegate the entire impact assessment to a single individual or team without cross-functional validation. This can lead to a narrow perspective, missing crucial insights from other departments. It also creates a single point of failure in the assessment process and can result in a lack of buy-in from stakeholders, hindering the effective implementation of mitigation strategies. This approach is ethically questionable as it does not foster collaborative problem-solving and can lead to a flawed assessment that negatively impacts the organization. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach impact assessments by first defining the scope and objectives clearly, ensuring all relevant systems, applications, and business processes are considered. They should then employ a structured methodology, such as a risk-based approach, to identify potential impacts, assess their likelihood and severity, and develop appropriate mitigation plans. Collaboration and communication with all affected stakeholders are paramount throughout the process. Documentation of the assessment, findings, and mitigation strategies is essential for accountability, future reference, and regulatory compliance. This systematic and inclusive approach ensures that Vblock deployments are implemented in a manner that minimizes risk, maximizes benefit, and upholds professional standards. Question 18. Governance review demonstrates that the current approach to assessing the potential consequences of Vblock system deployments is informal and lacks a standardized methodology. Which of the following represents the most appropriate professional response to address this identified governance gap? Option A. Develop and implement a formal, documented impact assessment process that systematically identifies, analyzes, and documents the potential technical, operational, business, security, and compliance impacts of Vblock system deployments. Option B. Delegate the responsibility for impact assessment entirely to the IT operations team, trusting their technical expertise to identify and address any significant issues during deployment. Option C. Rely on the Vblock system. Vendors provided documentation and implementation guides to cover all aspects of impact assessment, assuming they have adequately considered all potential consequences. Option D. Assume that the organization's existing general change management procedures are sufficient to capture all necessary impact considerations for Vblock system deployments without any specific enhancements. Correct answer is A. Develop and implement a formal documented impact assessment process that systematically identifies, analyzes, and documents the potential technical, operational, business, security, and compliance impacts of Vblock system deployments. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the governance review has identified a potential gap in the impact assessment process for Vblock system deployments. The challenge lies in ensuring that the organization's approach to assessing the impact of these deployments aligns with established best practices and any relevant regulatory or compliance frameworks that might govern such IT infrastructure changes, even if not explicitly detailed in the exam syllabus for this specific question. The absence of a formal, documented impact assessment process for Vblock systems could lead to unforeseen consequences, resource misallocation, security vulnerabilities, or operational disruptions, all of which carry significant business and potentially regulatory risk. Careful judgment is required to implement a robust and appropriate impact assessment methodology. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the identified governance gap by establishing a structured and repeatable process for impact assessment. This ensures that all potential consequences of Vblock system deployments are systematically identified, analyzed, and mitigated before implementation. This proactive approach minimizes risks, optimizes resource utilization, and supports informed decision-making. From a professional and ethical standpoint, it demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to responsible system deployment, aligning with the general principles of IT governance and risk management that underpin many regulatory frameworks. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the Vblock vendor's documentation for impact assessment is professionally unacceptable. While vendor documentation is valuable, it is typically focused on the technical aspects of the product and may not encompass the specific operational, business, or compliance impacts relevant to the deploying organization. This failure to conduct an independent, organization-specific impact assessment could lead to overlooking critical dependencies, integration challenges, or compliance deviations, potentially resulting in regulatory noncompliance or operational failures. Another incorrect approach, which involves delegating the entire impact assessment to the IT operations team without a defined framework or oversight, is also professionally flawed. While the operations team possesses valuable technical knowledge, they may lack the broader business context or the structured methodology required for a comprehensive impact assessment. This can lead to a narrow focus on technical feasibility, neglecting crucial business process, security, or user impact considerations. Without a standardized process, the assessment's thoroughness and consistency can vary significantly, increasing the risk of missed impacts and subsequent problems. A third incorrect approach, which is to assume that existing change management processes are sufficient without a specific impact assessment component for Vblock deployments, is professionally negligent. Change management focuses on the process of implementing changes, but it does not inherently guarantee a thorough assessment of the impact of those changes. Vblock systems, due to their integrated nature, often have a wider and more complex impact than standard IT changes. Relying on generic change management without a dedicated impact assessment phase for such significant deployments is a failure to adequately identify and manage risks. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Acknowledge and validate the findings of the governance review. 2. Understand the scope and criticality of the Vblock system deployment within the organization's context. 3. Research and identify relevant industry best practices for IT system impact assessment, considering frameworks like ITIL or COBIT, and any specific regulatory requirements applicable to the organization's industry and location. 4. Design or adapt an impact assessment methodology that is tailored to the organization's needs and the specific characteristics of Vblock systems. This methodology should cover technical, operational, business, security, and compliance aspects. 5. Define roles and responsibilities for conducting the impact assessment. 6. Ensure that the impact assessment process is integrated into the overall Vblock deployment lifecycle, including pre-deployment planning, implementation, and post-deployment validation. 7. Establish a mechanism for reviewing and approving impact assessment findings and mitigation plans. 8. Regularly review and update the impact assessment process to ensure its continued effectiveness. Question 19. When evaluating the deployment of a VCE Vblock system, a business unit urgently requests a deviation from the standard deployment checklist and risk assessment protocols to accelerate time to market for a new service. Which approach best balances the business unit's immediate needs with the organization's long-term operational integrity and regulatory compliance? Option A. Engage all relevant stakeholders, including IT operations, security, and compliance teams, to conduct a rapid but thorough risk assessment and document any agreed-upon deviations from the standard checklist, ensuring all actions align with the VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization guidelines and relevant regulatory frameworks. Option B. Inform the business unit that the deployment cannot proceed until the standard checklist and risk assessment are fully completed, even if it means significant delays, as adherence to protocol is paramount. Option C. Proceed with the expedited deployment as requested, prioritizing the business unit's urgent request to capture market opportunity, with a plan to address any identified risks post-deployment. Option D. Delegate the decision to the business unit manager, allowing them to approve the expedited deployment based on their understanding of market pressures, with IT providing only technical support. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the expedited deployment as requested, prioritizing the business unit's urgent request to capture market opportunity, with a plan to address any identified risks post-deployment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the immediate operational needs of a business unit and the long-term strategic goals and compliance requirements of the organization, particularly concerning the deployment of a VCE Vblock system. The business unit's desire for rapid deployment to meet market demands is understandable, but it must be balanced against the need for thorough risk assessment, adherence to established deployment methodologies, and compliance with relevant regulatory frameworks. Overlooking these aspects can lead to significant security vulnerabilities, operational instability, and potential regulatory penalties. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, risk-aware, and compliant deployment process. This involves engaging all relevant stakeholders, including IT operations, security, compliance, and the business unit itself, to ensure that the VCE Vblock system is deployed in a manner that meets both immediate business needs and long-term organizational objectives. Adhering to the VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization guidelines, which are implicitly tied to regulatory frameworks governing data security, system integrity, and operational resilience, ensures that the deployment is secure, stable, and auditable. This proactive engagement and adherence to best practices mitigate risks and foster trust among stakeholders. An incorrect approach that bypasses established change control and risk assessment procedures for expediency would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Specifically, it could violate guidelines related to system integrity and security, potentially leading to data breaches or service disruptions, which in turn could contravene data protection regulations. Furthermore, it demonstrates a disregard for the established governance processes designed to ensure responsible technology adoption, which is an ethical failing in professional conduct. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on technical implementation without considering the business impact or user adoption would also be professionally unacceptable. This oversight could lead to a technically sound but practically unusable system, failing to deliver the intended business value and potentially wasting organizational resources, which is a failure in professional diligence and strategic alignment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the project's objectives and constraints, including regulatory requirements and business needs. This should be followed by a comprehensive risk assessment, identifying potential technical, operational, and compliance risks. Stakeholder engagement is crucial throughout the process, ensuring that all parties are informed and their concerns are addressed. A structured approach to implementation, incorporating change management and testing, is essential. Finally, continuous monitoring and evaluation post-deployment ensure ongoing compliance and operational effectiveness. Question 20. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a critical Vblock system deployment for a financial services client is experiencing significant delays due to unforeseen integration challenges with existing security infrastructure. The project manager is under immense pressure to meet the go-live date, which is rapidly approaching. To mitigate the delay, a proposal is made to bypass certain security validation checks for the initial production rollout, with the intention of completing them in a phased approach post-launch. Which of the following approaches best represents professional practice in this scenario? Option A. Halt the deployment and reevaluate the integration strategy, engaging with security and compliance teams to develop a revised plan that incorporates all necessary validation steps before production go live, even if it means adjusting the timeline. Option B. Expedite the remaining security validation checks by reducing the scope of testing and relying on vendor-provided default security configurations to meet the deadline. Option C. Proceed with the full production deployment as planned, deferring the completion of all security validation checks to a post-deployment phase, relying on existing network security measures. Option D. Implement the Vblock system with a partial completion of security validation checks, focusing only on those deemed most critical for immediate operational functionality, and document the outstanding items for future remediation. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the full production deployment as planned, deferring the completion of all security validation checks to a post-deployment phase, relying on existing network security measures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in Vblock system deployments, balancing the need for rapid deployment and integration with robust security and compliance requirements. The pressure to meet aggressive timelines can lead to shortcuts that compromise data integrity and regulatory adherence. The professional challenge lies in navigating these competing demands, ensuring that technical implementation aligns with established security policies and relevant regulatory frameworks without introducing undue risk. The VCE Vblock system deployment and implementation virtualization exam focuses on practical application, meaning understanding how to operationalize these systems within a compliant environment is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, risk-based methodology that prioritizes security and compliance throughout the deployment lifecycle. This aligns with best practices in IT governance and VCE's recommended deployment methodologies. Specifically, it emphasizes the integration of security controls and validation steps before full production rollout. This proactive stance ensures that potential vulnerabilities are identified and remediated early, minimizing the risk of data breaches, system failures, or non-compliance with any applicable regulations that govern data handling and system integrity. Adhering to documented security policies and validation procedures is a cornerstone of professional IT deployment, demonstrating due diligence and a commitment to operational excellence. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with full production deployment without completing all security validation checks. This represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure, It bypasses critical control points designed to protect sensitive data and ensure system stability, potentially leading to breaches of confidentiality, integrity, or availability. From a regulatory standpoint, this could result in noncompliance with data protection laws, e.g., GDPR if applicable, or other relevant data privacy regulations, depending on the jurisdiction, implicitly assumed by the exam's focus on enterprise virtualization and industry-specific mandates. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for client or organizational security and a failure to uphold professional responsibilities. Another incorrect approach is to defer security validation to a post-deployment phase, relying on reactive measures. This is also professionally unacceptable. It creates a window of vulnerability where the system is exposed to threats without adequate defenses. This reactive posture is inherently riskier and more costly to remediate than a proactive, integrated approach. It fails to meet the standard of care expected in system deployments and can lead to significant operational disruptions and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach might be to assume that the Vblock system's inherent security features are sufficient without performing specific validation against the organization's unique security requirements and threat landscape. While Vblock systems are designed with security in mind, they are not a one-size-fits-all solution. Custom configurations, integration with existing infrastructure, and specific application needs introduce unique security considerations that must be explicitly validated. Failing to do so is a failure of due diligence and can leave critical gaps in the security posture. Professional reasoning. Professionals undertaking VCE Vblock system deployments must adopt a structured, risk-aware decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the project's objectives, including deployment timelines and functional requirements. 2. Identifying all relevant security policies, compliance mandates, and regulatory frameworks applicable to the data and systems being virtualized. 3. Integrating security and compliance validation steps into the deployment plan from the outset, treating them as critical path activities, not afterthoughts. 4. Conducting thorough risk assessments at each stage of the deployment to identify potential threats and vulnerabilities. 5. Implementing and validating security controls based on the risk assessment and compliance requirements. 6. Obtaining formal sign-off on security and compliance validation before proceeding to the next deployment phase or production rollout. 7. Maintaining comprehensive documentation of all security and compliance activities. This systematic approach ensures that technical implementation is aligned with business objectives and regulatory obligations, fostering trust and minimizing operational and security risks.